People that have walked through a forest at night and experienced a scary moment, what happened? I was a teenager and at a weekend camp. We were playing a flashlight tag game and I was running/hiding rather than seeking. I had been sneaking around a lot and bailing into the bush if the younger kids came near. It made it more fun if the leaders moved so the kids had more of a chance. This one time I was just about caught by a group and jumped into an area of brush. As soon as I landed I heard someone else shift and heard their breathing. I whispered, "Sorry, I didn't know you were here." They didn't answer. I waited with them for almost a minute in silence, aside from our breathing, while the kids went a different way. I said, "We can probably head off now," and started to go. The other person also left rustling through the brush the other way without saying a word. So, while I don't know what I was hunkered down with, it was bigger than a raccoon and smaller than a full-grown bear. Maybe a baby bear or a coyote? No idea, but it was kind of freaky after. I go for runs early in the morning. One morning at 5 a.m. it was misty. I'm running with my flashlight strapped to my head. Suddenly around the corner of this trail through the woods is a whole group of fully packed men in camo. The local university ROTC program was doing a morning run in full heavy backpack. They run with no lights. Add the mist and it felt like something out of a World War II movie. Saw something in the gloom, stood upright and a pair of glowing eyes about 5 to 6 foot up. I froze because human eyes don't reflect light, and this human-shaped non-human thing was looking right at me. Ended up being a deer nibbling on birch samara, but it definitely took my little monkey brain back to the Serengeti circa 10,000 BC. A few years ago I was with a few people walking through the woods where there were no trails. We had stopped and were talking quietly when I heard something unusual near me, like 15 feet away or so. I told the others to be quiet and quickly got my night vision scope out, and when I turned it on and looked I saw a terrifying face no more than 10 feet from us. I was absolutely spooked until I looked closer and realized it was just a cow and we had found our way next to his fenced-in area. Definitely scared me for a few moments. It was not a forest, but in Zimbabwe, at Victoria Falls, we heard that if you go to the falls on a full moon between 11:45 p.m. and 12:15 am you can see a lunar rainbow in the mist. A friend of mine and two girls we met there decided to go and took a shortcut. We had a flashlight. We saw 3 pairs of eyes looking at us. We turned off the flashlight and looked around and realized we were in the middle of a herd of African buffaloes. We estimated that there were at least 80 of them. We went real quiet and fortunately nothing happened. The lunar rainbow was spectacular. We took the long way back to the campsite on the way back. When my friends were about 14 or so, they walked up into the woods behind our buddy's house. After walking out into the wilderness for probably half an hour, they came across a well-kept, red-headed man. Without saying a word, he began walking at them, and proceeded to chase them for about 2 miles all the way back out of the woods. Once they got back into the clearing, he just turned around and walked back up into the wilderness. Bear, wolves, mountain lions, and bears are scary, sure. There is something that is scarier than all of them combined. Silence. The forest isn't a quiet place. There's wind, birds, and other animal noises, but when you are surrounded by complete silence it is scary as hell. Something about a silent forest scares me more than anything else. This was exactly what I came into this thread to say. A couple years ago, I loaded a bunch of camping gear onto my bicycle and spent the better part of the next 7 months riding 5,300 miles, 8,500 kilometers, around the US. Most often at night, I would choose to wild camp, simply finding somewhere to disappear into the woods, somewhere other people were unlikely to find me and even less likely to care that I was there. I very quickly got used to the sounds of the forest at night. Crickets and toads, the wind through trees, maybe the babbling of a nearby creek. It was always a highlight of the night, though not particularly uncommon to hear the distant yips and howls of coyotes, and one of my favorite moments of the whole trip was falling asleep to the sound of two owls, one to either end of my tent, hooting back and forth through the night. One night in late September, I was camping somewhere in the remote mountains of western Montana. And it was dead silent. There was not a single sound to be heard. It can only be described as the loudest silence I've ever heard, and it felt as though the entire forest was hiding from an equally silent predator. Suddenly the occasional snapping of a twig, a common sound normally lost in the cacophony of other noises, sounded like the crack of a gunshot. It was incredibly unnerving, and I could not get out of there soon enough come morning. When I was 16, me and my friend walked through the woods around 1:30 in the morning in the boonies of Michigan for fun. We took a few joints with us and off we went. We stumbled across a section in the woods with all sorts of weird shit set up in a small opening. A car smashed into a tree with all the limbs and vines growing through it. Old tables and chairs scattered about, huge piles of broken glass and ceramic, a bunch of random junk everywhere. We were puzzled as to what it was all doing out there in the middle of the woods. Then we heard a crunch on a branch and something stepping on the leaves out of the woods towards us. I can't say it wasn't an animal because we couldn't see, but the pace sounded eerily human, and we sprinted out of there so fast I still don't think there was a time I've ran faster in my life. I decided to face my fear of walking through the forest near my house at night. I walked through it on high alert. It was very frightening. I finally reached the edge, and pulled out my phone for some reason. As the light blinded me, I heard something rushing towards me. I couldn't see anything. I figured my only chance was to scare it away by screaming. So I screamed as loud and hard as I possibly could, and then screamed again as loud and hard as I could. Then my vision returned and it was my neighbor and his small dogs. He said, "Geez, you even scared me." "Sorry. Sorry," I yelled. "I have anxiety." And stumbled away. Broad daylight. I cycled through a local forest and discovered an old shack. Years before, it was the hideout of a gangster whose buddies tracked him down there. A flag was placed over the door. I later read in an article that this flag was a sign of assassination. It was used to signify a particularly long, bloody killing reserved for snitches and double-crossers. I am still very weirded out by the memory. We used to catch fish at my grandparents' cabin near the Canadian border, and we would have a dumping ground for the guts of the fish we caught. This was probably 250 years into the woods far away from the cabin, so we wouldn't attract bears or other scavengers near our place where we were staying. I was 11 years old and was tasked with dumping the guts. It was dusk and I headed into the woods when I took a wrong turn. I realized this and headed back to the main trail when all of a sudden it's getting dark. I don't have a flashlight or phone on me, so I keep walking down the trail and I find the dumping ground. So here I am, it's almost pitch black, except for the moon, and I smell rotting fish guts when I hear a large animal probably 20 feet away from me in the woods. I slowly walk down the trail, and when I get on the main road I book it back to my cabin. The next day we find cougar tracks at the fish dumping ground. To this day I still am terrified of the woods at night. It was seriously a traumatic experience. Not walking, but mountain biking. I have a couple of LED lights for night riding, a wide floodlight on my handlebars and a narrow beam spotlight on my helmet. I'm in Florida, and was riding through a swampy jungle when I noticed the trail was covered with these little, sparkly, emerald green shiny things. I assumed they were crystals like quartz or something, except that the trails are mostly sand and shouldn't have anything like that. So I decided to stop and see what the reflection was, and it was light reflecting back from the eyes of a giant wolf spider. Arg! The trail is covered with spiders. Literally hundreds and hundreds of them. And those are only the ones facing me. Another time on the same trails, I was flying down a long straightaway, and up ahead I can see a pair of eyes on the trail reflecting back at me. They were low to the ground, so I thought they were a raccoon or a possum or something. As I got closer, they started to rise up. And up. and up some more, until they were, it seemed, as tall as a person. Just as the creature got into range of my spotlight, it turned around and bolted into the trees. I only saw its back in my spotlight for a moment, but whatever it was big and covered in medium brown hair. I'm guessing it was a deer, but I'm not sure and I wasn't sticking around to find out.